Hey, everybody, welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Brief, the best of what we learned this week and the most up-to-date new information that's happening today. Let's jump right in because there's a lot happening. And now, of course, we've been talking this whole week about these conversations that happen, but direct talks between the United States and Iran. Are we or aren't we going to war? And the information continues on to this day. So right now we have literally just 2 hours ago, Foreign Minister Arakchi from Iran says that, by the way, we're hoping that it goes well, but if it doesn't, if the U.S. attacks anyway, Iran says that it will strike U.S. bases in the region. They again reply and inform everyone that this will not be a cost-free endeavor. Now, one of the things that I have pointed out during this week, and I think it is so vital that it understands now, is that those who may say, yeah, Iran has said that all the time. They always say that. They never do it. I mean, you can go back to when their Soleimani was assassinated, when their embassy was destroyed, when the guy was assassinated in the capital city during an inauguration, all those things, and they never responded. And even when they did, it was just a little bit. It wasn't that much. So it won't be this time either. There is a significant, and you cannot miss this, there is a massive difference this time that has not existed on any of those other kind of situations there. And that is that now we're saying that the objective is regime change, the destruction of the Ayatollah and his entire government. We want the whole thing to be knocked down. So now then, whereas in the past it was, well, we want you to negotiate, we want a better deal, and we're going to cause some pain if you don't do what we want, but we're not going after the regime. So they had some incentive and motivation to withhold in their response as long as they believe they could stay in power, because regime survival is their number one priority above everything, even taking care of their people. And if you take that away from them, and if you say that this time when the bullets and the bombs start falling, the end result is your head in a noose, or you're underneath the rubble of a building that we blow up with you in it, then you give them every positive incentive to strike back. So don't take his words as empty rhetoric, because if we attack this time, based on what we've said up to this point, he may actually do it. Now, Arakchi was also at a forum in the Middle East today that was attended by many in the region, and he was given a speech in there. Now, one of the things he sought to do, I believe, is to try and change the focus off over just will Trump or won't Trump attack Iran, but to say, listen, Iran's not the biggest problem in the Middle East. There's another one.
What we are witnessing in Gaza is not merely war. It is not a conflict between equal parties. It is not an unfortunate byproduct of security measures. It is the deliberate destruction of civilian life on a massive scale. It is genocide. The human cost of Israel's atrocities in Gaza has wounded the conscience of humanity. It has torn open the heart of the Muslim world, and it has also shaken millions beyond it, Christians, Jews, and people of all kinds, all faiths, who still believe that the life of a child is not a bargaining chip, that starvation is not a weapon, that hospitals are not battlefields, and that the killing of families is not self-defense. Palestine today is not simply a tragedy. It is a mirror held up to the world.
Now, this speech here was very carefully crafted, and you can see in the way it's constructed, he is seeking not just to say, hey, America's bad for wanting to attack us. We're not the bad guys. He's actually changing it entirely to saying, hey, let's take a look at the whole region here and see, where do you think the problem is? Because there is a government in this region that is doing all these terrible things, that is killing children, killing families, using destruction, starvation, all that stuff. And he's like, it ain't us. We're not the ones. And then he's careful to say, we're all in this together. Muslims, Christians, people of any faith who have these morals that transcend any kind of specific religion, but that all elevate and uplift the dignity of life and the value of humanity. So they're trying to set themselves up as saying, hey, listen, this is what's going on here. So meaning, don't just worry about whether Iran's going to get destroyed, because that's only part of the calculation. Look at what's happening to the Palestinian people. And of course, this has fallen on very fertile ground, because there's a lot of people both in the Middle East and around the world that are very sensitive and amenable to that line of thinking. And you can see, in fact, number one, that there's that many people in the auditorium and high-ranking folks that are at this forum in the midst of all these negotiations, and in the midst of the possibility that at any moment the U.S. could launch an attack against Iran. And yet they have invited the foreign minister in and given him this forum because I think they want some of those messages to be progressed and moved forward. There's also, it's also important to point out that many of the countries that are represented in there are not giving America overflight protection and permissions. They're not participating in some of the earlier rounds, especially the ones in 2024, where the U.S. Used its military and its air power, especially to help Israel in defending against drone and missile attacks from Iran. Several other countries took part in it, like Jordan, for example. I mean, they not only gave overflight permission, they actually used their aircraft to help the United States against Iran. No more. Now that they're starting to say more and more that they're worried about bigger things than just Iran, and that they don't want their airspace to be used. They don't want Iran to be attacked. So that needs to be understood. Now, one of the other things that Arakshi was doing in that meeting there is to show a really strong contrast regarding the Palestinian people and how they view them to Benjamin Netanyahu, who a little over a week ago had his own statement to make on the Palestinian situation, and it was somewhat less touchy-feely.
אני שומע גם עכשיו את האמירות שנאפשר את שיקום עזה לפני הפירוז. זה לא יקרה. אני שומע שנכניס חיילים טורקים וחיילים קטרים לעזה. גם זה לא יקרה. אני שומע שאני אאפשר הקמת מדינה פלסטינית בעזה. זה לא קרה וזה לא יקרה. אני חושב שכולכם יודעים שמי שעצר הקמת מדינה פלסטינית שוב ושוב, זה אני, יחד עם חבריי בממשלות שעמדתי בראשן. גם היום וגם מחר, לא נאפשר זאת.
So you see that Benjamin Netanyahu is not saying anything about taking care of the children. No lamentations about, it's unfortunate or this collateral damage, anything like that at all. Just, okay, there's not going to be any Palestinian state, period. There hasn't been, there's not going to be, and there's not going to be any rebuilding until everything that we want happens security-wise, et cetera. So they're saying the suffering is going to continue. And we see in the headlines that airstrikes continue into the Gaza, they continue in the West Bank, they continue in Lebanon. I mean, the fighting continues on. The idea that there's a ceasefire is one that exists on paper only. It is less than it used to be, but it is still going on. Even to this week, there's been a lot of airstrikes in the area. A lot of Palestinian people have been killed. A lot of Lebanese people have been killed. The fighting continues on. And the Arab regimes are tired of the fighting. The last thing they want is another war to start, this time against Iran. Now, last night, after this meeting in Oman on Friday, between actually it turned out that it wasn't a direct meeting, it was an indirect meeting. And I'm not sure why that was the case, because it was originally billed that they would all be together, but apparently they had intermediaries floating around, so that's actually not a good sign. But President Trump was asked on Air Force One last night how he thought that the talks went.
Iran looks like it wants to make a deal very badly. We have to see what that deal is. But I think Iran looks like they want to make a deal very badly, as they should. Last time they decided maybe not to do it, but I think they probably feel differently. We'll see what the deal is. It'll be different than last time. And we have a big armada. We have a big fleet heading in that direction. We're going to be there pretty soon. So we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, he said they want a deal real bad. I think that it is accurate to say that the Iranian side does want a deal real bad, because the last thing that they want is to be attacked by the United States. That's self-evident. So that part is definitely accurate. There's no question that the Iranian side wants to continue to go with diplomacy because they want to find some sort of negotiated way away from war. But you see, just like President Trump ended his conversation there by saying, but we have this big armada there, so we can use it if necessary. You also have the Iranian delegation with their foreign minister Arakshi saying the same thing, that we want a negotiated settlement, but we'll attack your bases in the region if we don't get one. So both sides are saying that they want to talk, and both sides are saying that they have military forces standing by at the ready if the discussions and the talks fail. But let's look a little bit more carefully at what's actually being discussed here. And if Trump says, they want to make a deal, well, it depends on what deal they want to make, because you had Secretary of State Rubio heading into those talks by saying the United States wanted no nuclear enrichment, a significant curb on its missile program, and cutting off all support to the proxies in the region that Iran has. Iran went into the meeting saying that we'll talk about enrichment, not that we'll just give it away, but we'll talk maybe about limiting it. So there's some room for negotiation on that part. But they said about the missiles and about the support of their proxies in the region, they said that's not even going to be on the table. So when you hear Trump saying that they want a deal, they want a narrow deal. But Trump went in at least saying that there was this three-part deal. And according to Rubio, he said it had to include all of those things. And he also added a fourth one, that it had to include protection for the Iranian people on the ground, not to be killed by their government in protest, etc. So if that's the standard that Trump's saying he's got to have before there's not going to be any war, I think you can see where that's going to go. But the Iranian side is saying, we're not going to talk about that, but if you do, understand it's going to be game on. And as I told you at the top of the show here, I think they mean it this time. And if people are actually gambling and wanting to roll the dice and say, no, I think we can attack them and they won't do this, and we can literally just have regime change like the Israelis did against Hezbollah, where they took out all these senior leaders and then finally assassinated the senior leader himself and had regime decapitation. Maybe some people, and then nothing happened. All those missiles they didn't fly, et cetera. And I think that people thinking, yeah, the same thing will happen here. We can just go in and do them. There won't be a response. One person I know thinks that, or is unconcerned if it does happen, and that is Mike Pompeo, who wanted to tell his boss this week, or his former boss rather, hey, don't go after negotiations. Let's don't even seek that.
Most folks here, they understand that any deal that the Iranians might strike is something they'll do what they've always done. They'll lie, they'll cheat, they won't honor that commitment. And I'm confident President Trump is not naive enough to head down the same path that President Obama did, right? He called it the stupidest deal in history, if I remember correctly. To get an actual agreement from the Iranians would require a complex set of verifications to allow us to go in and see what's really going on. The destruction of their ballistic missile program. I suspect that's a bridge too far for the Iranian regime, and so I think President Trump will likely have to make good on his promise, which he said, help is on the way. And I'm convinced that the Iranian people will provide help for the United States in helping overthrow this regime.
So that's what you want to see. You want to see the regime overthrown.
In the end, Maria, I don't think this regime is fixable. I've not seen the Ayatollah prepared to actually do what we need to keep Americans safe.
So that we showed that earlier this week. That's what this is. It's the intel brief from the best we learned this week. I'm still I just cannot bring myself to comprehend the gravity and the depravity of what's conveyed in that. Like it's just another interview on mainstream media with a former senior official in an American government. That he's saying, let's don't have a negotiation. He's saying, let's go and kill them. And I don't think that they're going to be able to make a deal. And even if they did, we couldn't trust it. So again, let's go in with the missiles, because I just, I don't think that they're going to ever do what we want. And he's probably right. They're not going to just lay down and do what we want to do. But that's not supposed to be a standard. That's not even supposed to be legal. And yet he's saying it as a simple matter of fact, like, well, yeah, we have the most power. So we tell them to jump. They either jump or we kill them. That's what he's saying right there. And it is stunning. And it is also stunning in that he is using his platform right there to go on this television, on Fox News, of course, where Trump watches all the time, and tries to humiliate Trump by saying, you said that a deal with the Ayatollah back when Obama did it was the worst thing that ever happened, and you got out of it in 2018. Why would you get into another one there? And then he plays the card, the Obama card. You want to be like Obama, the worst deal ever? Because, let's be frank. If Trump says, okay, I'm going to look for a face-saving way out of this because I recognize that the cost to the United States could potentially be much more than we're willing to pay, so I'm going to just agree to whatever they talk about in the nuclear capacity there, and we'll move on. You realize that what's on the table right now from the Iranian side is less good than the 2015 Obama nuclear deal. It's less good than that. at least what's being discussed right now. So Pompeo was laying the groundwork and throwing down another card to Trump of saying, if you agree to something like that, we're coming after you. And we're going to say that you're Obama, that you're weak, that you said one time that was the worst deal, and now you don't even have that good of a deal. You know, who are you? And they're going to call him out. And believe me, there's plenty of other folks. We showed a bunch this week that have just been like a whole chorus of people, like a platoon of folks going on all the media, in the conservative media, just blasting over and over. Don't be Obama. Don't be negotiations. It can only be destruction. All we can do is kill them and have regime change. Just over and over and over. He's been saturated with that. Well, because we on this channel are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring all the truth, we're trying to bring a little bit of sober reality into some of these conversations. And Larry Johnson, former CIA officer and intel analyst, said, by the way, if Pompeo gets his way, you might want to consider a couple of factors.
If this goes hot and Iran, and this will be a quick war in terms of how long the United States can stay engaged before at least it has to withdraw the naval force to go refit, rearm, because let's assume if Iran launches 100 drones a day against each of the destroyers, that means each of those destroyers will exhaust their air defense missiles in the first day. Okay? Because they've got about 50, maybe 60. But and Iran is quite capable of launching that many drones and missiles. So they're quickly, immediately, they're out of weapons. They're out of air defense. So then they got to sail to, looks like Diego Garcia is the closest naval port. And that's a 3-day journey down and then a 3-day journey. So this war would be fighting in stop, start, stop.
And of course, what he didn't talk about there, but we did subsequently, is in the event that Iran does what it said today, where Foreign Minister Rakshi again reiterated, if you attack us, the first thing we're doing is going after your troops in the region. And Gary keeps showing you that map and showing you there's a lot of targets that are out there. Here's the issue that the Pompeos, the Jack Kings, the Victoria Coates, the Rebecca Grants, none of these people want to talk about is the fact that Iran can do great damage. They believe that they can't, or they believe that our air defense in the area is going to be so good that all of our anti-missile ship defenses on our naval fleets, the aircraft carrier, the destroyers, the littoral combat ships, all those vessels, that they're all going to work, that none of the Iranian speedboats are going to get through, that none of the Iranian torpedo boats are going to get close enough to actually do any damage, that none of our aircraft are going to get shot down, that all of our missiles will get through, that none of theirs will get through on our land targets, that all of our bases throughout the region, all the land forces, that Iran will fire these missiles and all of our air defense will all work and no one will get hit. They either believe that, or they believe Iran won't do any of that, or Iran can't do that. We're going to go in. The first thing we're going to do is take out their air defense with our capabilities, and they're very robust in our it's called a SEAD, suppressive enemy air defenses. There's no doubt it's very robust, but it's not perfect. But they seem to think that it'll be perfect and we'll knock all of their air defense out, so they'll be totally open, and then we can come in and just have our way and do anything that we want, and they won't be able to do anything in response. But that ignores what happened in June of last year. That ignores what happened with the missiles that they fired even against Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar last year. Missiles get through, and a lot of them got through in Israel. And look, there was all kinds of damage that was done. And Iran appeared to be very judicious in what it struck to minimize the number of casualties, but maximize physical destruction. But if they decide there's no reason to pull any punches here, we're going to go after high-value targets that are going to cause casualties, high casualty producers, because they may calculate That's their only chance to hold the United States and Israel at bay, is by making it not just painful, but making it really painful on the human level. And all of these people, this whole chorus of folks, are all hoping that Iran can't do that, or that they won't do that. And they're not willing to say what happens in the worst case scenario, which is not, it's the worst case scenario in here is not like something that is incredibly improbable, or that would be almost impossible to do, but theoretically possible. This is something that they have the capacity, the demonstrated capacity to do. The question that we don't have is, what is their political decision? But if they choose to take that political decision, they do have the means to extract a lot of blood on our side. They can cause lots of damage and lots of death in Israel. They can cause lots of damage and lots of destruction to America throughout our bases in the region. They can pull their big ace in the hole, and that is shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which will just mess up the global economy. But for sure, the Western economy will be the first ones hit negatively by that. All of those things are possible if we go through and take this action here. And I don't know what would happen, but I can say with the utmost confidence that Iran is not just going to roll over and just say, sure, shoot us all and kill us until you've destroyed our regime, and then you can just roll in and set up whoever you want. 2 big thumbs up, a big win for President Trump, Nobel Peace Prize, all that kind of weird stuff. That's not going to happen. So let's hope we don't have to find out. Let's hope that this stays in the theoretical, though I will tell you, if Trump does and just finds a face-saving way to have some kind of negotiation to push this off the table, and I desperately hope that he does, one thing I'll just tell you right now, the Pompeos, the Keens, the Coates, the Grants, those folks are not going to go quietly into the night. You can count on they will be seething mad, and they will continue to be looking for new opportunities to bring it back up again and say, we have to take more action. So they won't give up. They won't quit. And the pressure won't be let off President Trump if he thinks that's the case. He just needs to be prepared with that. Well, listen, that's not the only thing on President Trump's plate right now, not the only headache that he has, where he has literal war and peace issues on the table and significant ramifications based on his action. Let's go over to the Russia-Ukraine war and look at what things that are happening in Europe. And first of all, just news this morning is that the U.S. President Trump has given Ukraine and Russia a June deadline to end the war. And this is according to Volodymyr Zelensky. He says that the U.S. president has given a deadline. And according to the article here, which was, I think, first reported by the Associated Press, the U.S. has given Russia and Ukraine a June deadline to reach an agreement in the nearly 4-year war. The Americans are proposing the parties to end the war by beginning of this summer, and will probably put pressure on the parties precisely according to this schedule. Zelensky told reporters. This is not rumor, or this is not innuendo. This is Zelensky himself publicly saying this. He added that the President Donald Trump's administration has insisted on a clear timeline for all events, and has proposed holding the next round of trilateral talks next week in the U.S., likely in Miami, according to Ukraine, has said that it will confirm that it's going to attend. Listen, let's just talk a little bit about that, what that means. This is something that Doug McGregor said that President Trump should have done on like January 21st of last year, his first day in office, or the second day. He should have come in and given this kind of an ultimatum. He should have done this a long time ago. Possibly hundreds of thousands of people would still be alive today had he done that. But it now looks like he's going to. Well, let's just understand what this is meaning here. This is telling everybody, Europe, Ukraine, Russia, everybody, there is now a ticking clock, a countdown clock. So whereas up to this point, everything it's been more like just a game without like a baseball, for example. Just like we'll just keep playing inning after inning, whatever. Now then it's more like a football game where there's a clock with a clock counting down to 0. And once it gets 00, game's over. Nope. And whoever's ahead on the scoreboard, that's who's going to win. But it's now got a terminal date of June. Because if the U.S. validates this, and I can't imagine that Zelensky's going to say something publicly and then the U.S. is going to contradict it. Well, I don't imagine it's going to happen in this world. I can't say anything with any guarantees. But the likelihood is that they're going to say, yeah, that's the case here. But what that is, even if Trump doesn't publicly say it, but this is what Zelensky's saying. Of course, all the heads of state are going to know of all these different countries. is that he's telling Russia, keep going with what you're doing because there's no reason for you to back off and do anything. Russia will absolutely now zero chance that they will compromise on anything because now then they see that the countdown clock is now on the board. And so they see now then there's every reason to accelerate what they're doing, especially in this energy attacks here, because they see it has had their expected result, which is to confirm on the other side, to make the other side realize that the war, not only, of course, the war can't be won by the West, but that the loss can't be avoided. And now that has apparently has sunk into the United States that they acknowledge the war can't be, the loss can't be avoided. So now then he's saying, we're not going to put any more money into this. We're not going to send any more of our interceptor missiles. We're not going to do any more of this stuff on something that can't, where a loss can't even be avoided. It's foolish to the highest degree. Should have came up to that conclusion a long time ago. If they'd have been watching our show, we could have told them that. But nevertheless, it appears that he's come to it. That also tells the Europeans that the game is up. So you can be talking about, $45 billion you're going to give Ukraine this year, $45 billion you're going to give them the next year. You're going to keep them afloat. And you're going to continue to, talk about all this negotiations that are going to happen in these post-war coalition of the willing, et cetera. That's now out of the picture. That's now just ridiculous stuff. But that won't die easy. And even this week, there has been some statements here. So let me show you a little bit about what's happening here. First of all, we had Patrick Baum on German reporter, who we asked to comment on something that Mark Rutte said when he went to Kiev on Monday, talking about this coalition of the willing.
Some European allies have announced that they will deploy troops to Ukraine after a deal is reached. Troops on the ground, jets in the air. The United States will be the backstop.
The few people who are listening to him are looking onto the table and not to the speaker. So that means they don't believe him a single word. They think Mark Rutte is a liar. He makes empty promises. That's the point. I can tell you, just imagine Western countries, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany would bring in troops. They could bring in, let me say, 60,000 to 70,000 men. And according to General Harald Kujat, who's a friend of mine, these 60,000 men will be destroyed in 1 week because the Russians have more than 700,000 men in Donbass. And what Mark Rutte is telling the audience is, you have to go, you have to continue the war for us. And I'm making empty promises for you. You have to die and you will get nothing for it.
He put it in pretty stark terms there. And I think that realization is coming both to Ukrainian people, to the Ukrainian troops, and even to the European elites. I don't know. When I saw that comment by Rutte, it just didn't have any conviction in it at all. He's always kind of flourishing with a lot of rhetoric, but to me, and I don't know, maybe it's just my jaundiced eyes I'm looking through, he didn't have any conviction in it that he believed any of the things that he said. And you saw Patrick Baum there was pointing out some very important things. The Europeans, if you get all of their deployable forces, nearly all of them that would be willing to give, and of course, we're talking primarily about Germany, France, and the UK, and maybe some from Italy. If you took all of that and put them all in, as he said there, you're going to get maybe 60,000 genuine combat troops with no experience, by the way, none. No actual combat experience. They can study and they can read, but until you've actually lived this kind of war, as both the Russians and the Ukraine sides learn to their deep, bloody pain, especially in the first year of the war, you don't really know how to fight this. And the learning curve is very steep and very bloody on your side. So you can get maybe 60,000, as he pointed out. Russia has somewhere around 700,000 in Ukraine alone, and several 100,000 others in the environs near the border. that they could call upon if they ever needed to. So the European side understands that you're not going to be able to do this. They understand that you're not going to be able to succeed and to do anything if you even get there. And of course, that's the other thing that Mark Rutte has to understand. And I think that he does. I don't know why I keep saying this nonsense, because the fact is you can't do this if you put your I mean, it's not even the fact that you don't have that number of troops, but the fact is that those would only go in there if there was a deal. And the only way there'll be a deal is if both sides agree on the terms. So the only way that even theoretically these allegedly 60,000 troops of the willing would be able to go in there from the West is if the Russians agree to it. And they were emphatic. And we showed you earlier this week where Sergei Lavrov and Maria Zakharova both categorically said zero chance, no. In fact, Maria Zakharova, we showed later in the week, where she's directly addressed what Mark Rutte said. And she says, absolutely not. It's not non-negotiable. If they come, they will be attacked. So therefore, they're not going to come because they're not going to go in knowing they're going to get crosshairs on them because the Russians won't agree to it. So that won't be a term. So it's very possible, if not outright probable, that Mark Rutte is saying those kinds of things just to kick the can down the road a little bit and pretend that they're supporting Ukraine and they're still trying to help out, knowing that they'll never have to make good on that. And the net result of that is more Ukrainian people are going to die. But that truth, I think, is starting to come to them as we can see on some of the people that were listening to Mark Rutte's conversation. More on that in a minute. But we also had Alexander Mercurius, who took it a little bit further and said, let's take a look at this whole security guarantee stuff that Rutte was talking about.
These security guarantees that Mark Rutte is talking about is that they're supposed to come into place once the war ends. Talking about security guarantees in this way ensures that the war isn't going to end because it disincentivizes the Russians from agreeing to end the war. They will say to themselves, why should we end the war if the Europeans and the Americans and the Ukrainians are going to do this? And in the meantime, as the war continues, Ukraine gets no benefit from these security guarantees that are never going to materialize. The people in that room, those people looking at each other, you could almost see them shaking their heads in some cases. All of them are saying to themselves, what planet is this person on? We need protection. We need an end to these attacks on our city, on our country now. We don't want security guarantees contingent upon the end of a war, which the Russians are now being incentivized to continue.
He couldn't have put it any more succinct. The Ukrainian people want relief right now. They don't want some theoretical, maybe way off in the distant future, that if there's another years from now war, that then all of these cool Europeans are going to come over our shoulder and protect, and then they'll fight those darn Russians and protect us. They're like, we got to get to there. We can't even get to a place. Are we even going to survive as a political entity? That's what they're worried about right now. Are they going to be able to get water today? Are they going to be able to avoid freezing to death tonight? That's what they're worried about right now. Not some high in the sky claims about some future theoretical condition to where then we'll fight for you when we won't now. That's one of the things that the West just has not ever acknowledged or come to grips with. But who is going to believe that someday you're going to fight and die and go against a nuclear power, which could then go nuclear and have a nuclear weapon used against your cities? What country in Europe is going to go to war to Russia for Ukraine in the future when they won't do it today? And they're wise not to do it today. And they would be wise not to do it in the future, and they won't. It won't be, if that ever even materialized, even let's say that they decided to unilaterally come up with some kind of security guarantees and promises, even if Russia didn't agree to it, it wouldn't be worth the paper it was written on. No nation is going to take that action that's going to bring the potential for nuclear weapons on its cities for the behest of Ukraine. when obviously it will have been in chaos for many, many years. And why would they risk their security over something here that they couldn't reverse anyway? Unless Russian troops are massing on their border and ready to come over against them or start firing missiles against them, then it's a whole different ballgame. And they already have that kind of security guarantee. It's called an Article 5. So you see that this is as nonsensical as it can possibly be here. And yet the so-called elite in Europe, and whether we're talking about Mark Rutte, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, the Ursula von der Leyen, Kaya Kallas, I mean, et al., the whole bloody lot of them. All these folks are detached from reality to their own harm and definitely to the harm of the Ukrainian people. And now here we have President Trump saying, all right, boys, get this wrapped up by June. It doesn't say what. Now, that's one of the reasons we're waiting to hear what the U.S. says, or what. What are you going to do if there's nothing by June? Apparently, he's going to put pressure on both. Well, there's no pressure he can put on Russia. Let's be clear on that, because it says that President Trump, according to that article, would bring pressure on both sides to bring it. Well, there's no pressure he can bring on Russia, or he would have already done it. The only pressure he has is to apply on the Ukraine side and the European side to saying, agree to this term or we're going to walk. And that's one of the things that Doug McGregor said should have happened in the first few days of Trump's administration. We'll see if he'll do it now. He has every incentive to want to do it, but we'll see if he actually comes through with it. So that's what Zelensky's saying. We'll see what comes from that. And we're going to keep tracking on all these things. I hope that we just stay in the theoretical realm, talking about what may or may not happen with the potential war between the United States and Iran. And let's hope that we can get to an end of this war before June, so that we can stop the killing there and we can at least start the process of healing, even if it'll take generations and decades probably, but you got to start somewhere. You can't get to a good place over there if you don't have day one here. And let's hope that we can get to that sooner rather than later. Listen, before we let you go today, you heard a couple of comments there by both Patrick Bob and also by Alexander Mercurius about some commentary about what the faces in the crowd look like when they were talking, when Rutte was talking to the Verkhovna Rada in Kiev earlier this week. And Gary has some interesting observations on that. He and I talked about a number of things, and there was another interesting video from later in this week in the United States that we thought required some analysis. And Gary, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, no, Dana, what I wanted to, for everyone, I edited it out so we could take a look at the audio. Wait, there was an audience here. Wait, they're back. Give me a second. There we go. Okay. There was an audience there, but they weren't very attentive, it seems, Danny. They were on their phones. They were distracted. And the choice box seats, look at this, the choice box seats.
Empty.
There. They couldn't sell the choice box seats. Now, normally, Danny, in a concert, they would have canceled the concert because there's just not enough people there. But since these were free, but we went back to those guys. They never came around. We thought, okay, let's go back. Are they paying attention now? No, not yet. Still. So Rutte had a tough crowd there. He had a very tough crowd.
And that's I think you're the one that made a comment. This is juxtaposed against, like, say, when Benjamin Netanyahu came to speak to the U.S. Congress, and how he could hardly get a sentence in without this explosive cheers and everybody going. The place was literally packed. The gallery was packed, etc. Earlier in this war, and I wish I had thought to pull it up. There was when some visiting dignitaries had spoken there. Every seat was filled and people were engaged, and they were looking at the speaker. And then hear this.
Yeah.
That right there is
it says it all, right?
It says it all. Rutte is talking about security guarantees and we're going to help you and all this kind of stuff. And the people everywhere around the gallery just are like this. They're like looking around like, is he serious? Nobody. And I mean, Gary, and when you watch the whole clip and you watch the whole speech, because it was, I think, like 17 or 18 minutes.
Yeah.
It never changed. I never saw, maybe there was some polite applause, golf applause at some point. I didn't see it, but you see so few people, so few of the seats are even filled. And then the people were just, I guess they probably just said, hey, we need to get a lot of people showing up for this because the Secretary General of NATO's here. But
you know what, Danny, when I first saw it, I thought, well, do we have to point this out to people? But without even saying anything to the guests we had on this week, they both referred to it, which was so interesting because it was that obvious that we didn't even have to alert them to it. Sometimes you have to say, hey, by the way, pay attention. No, it was quite revealing.
And what do you think that signals here, especially now that, according to Zelensky, President Trump has said you got a June deadline? I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, do you think maybe they already knew?
Yeah, Danny, I'm outside, obviously, very far away from this, but boy, we see the writing on the wall. Do they actually see the writing on the wall now? Is that what's it's finally it's come to roost that, my gosh, we got to stop kidding ourselves.
Now, I will tell you from a certain source in Kiev that I have facilitated over the last year or so, I was told almost a month ago that privately President Trump had already given Zelensky a deadline and said an ultimatum is the way they put it. They said either you come to an agreement that I can live with, or we're going to walk. And I didn't say anything about it because I couldn't validate it from any other sources. And this person was once removed from the person that said it. So since if I can't validate something, I don't want to talk much about it. But
of course, now
that we see this from Zelensky's own mouth, now what I heard about a month ago seems more and more likely to be true. And it also, because since they had told me, I had not seen anything publicly about it. So again, I just said, all right, well, maybe that was just what some people are thinking. But now then it makes it look like that Trump has said, okay, I told you privately that you either have to end this or we're going to walk. And now you didn't. So now he's apparently said something publicly.
He's gone public with it.
So we'll certainly be watching a lot on that. But yeah, those to me, those faces in retrospect to look at all this stuff, I think they already knew, and they knew that there was not a shred of truth to anything that Ruto was saying there, and they know that the die is cast.
Yeah, they ain't buying what he's putting down.
Yeah, well, that was
there's another audience.
There's another audience. Can tell us a little bit about what we're about to see.
Oh yeah, there's not much to say except because it speaks for itself. Now, this is Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary. And, typical, congressional hearing. But per usual, we're not really listening to what he's saying now. But we're looking at the audience here. And there's one particular man here who I thought he was a prop. I thought it was a painting that he put up. But no, it's not a prop. And he's not a painting. He is actually a living, breathing person. What I had to do was I actually, isolated it here. Now, if I was to not have Scott in the picture, you would think this is a painting, but no, it's a person. Now, is he practicing mind control? I also double checked. I said, was it bring your nephew to work day? And that he was just pissed off having to listen to his uncle ramble on. It wasn't bring your nephew to work day, but this man has perfected stoicism, right?
Yeah, Gary, he has not blinked.
Not once.
Since had him on there.
I'm going to start it back over from the beginning. So you see Scott in the picture. No, you can see there are people moving.
Yeah, that woman behind,
but not this man. Not this man. He is,
and also, honestly, even the guy on his other side there, he blinks a couple of times, but he's not moving much either. No emotion, but that dude with that's bald here, man.
If they paid you $1,000, could you do that?
I couldn't, man. I couldn't, and I'd want it. I don't think I could do it right now. Even
it's really something. So it was just so remarkable seeing this guy. My gosh. There he is.
There he is.
Now, who the heck is this guy?
Did we ever find out who he was even?
Is he the ultimate swamp person in DC?
The swamp, an actual swamp creature.
The actual swamp person, yeah. He's the guys we're trying to get rid of. We'll never get rid of him. Can't move him.
Yeah, anyway. That's listen, you got to have a little fun every now and then. I mean, there's so many things we're talking about here that's so important about life and death and war and peace and all that, but I don't know.
He never moved. He never moved.
It was hard for me because what Bessent was saying there was really important because that's where he was admitting that we had intentionally set up the conditions to crash the rial in Iran, to cause the protest that happened, and we specifically sent in people and all that. Then he was admitting that we did the financial parts of that. And it was hard for me. I'm listening to him, but I keep looking over at that guy. It was hard for me to pay attention to him because I'm like, is he ever going to blink?
No.
Anyway,
no.
Turns out no is the answer. Oh, boy. Well, listen, there's so many things that are on the table here and so many things we're going to be keeping an eye on for you. And, man, unfortunately, if anything happens over the weekend, check back into the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, because Gary and I will be right here to bring it all to you as it's happening and give you the breaking analysis if there is anything to report. And definitely as soon as we hear anything from the U.S. side, if there's any confirmation of this claim by Zelensky, we'll certainly bring that to you as well. But in the meantime, hope you have a good rest of your weekend, and we will look forward to seeing you Monday morning on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Amen.